I want to welcome everybody to the April 2021 meeting of the San Jose Astronomical Association Imaging Special Interest Group. Tonight we have Mark Streebeck joining us. Mark is a former host of the Imaging SIG and handed it down to me a few years ago, and we're very happy to have him back again. He's going to talk about an observatory that he and a couple of friends put together down in New Mexico called the Namid Observatory. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you, Mark.
Cool, thank you. So yes, Bruce said, I'm with this hobby now for quite a number of years. Started out as most of us, telescope in the backyard, at some point something bigger, went to star parties. And again, at some point, as probably most of us had the idea, like, okay, maybe setting up a telescope somewhere else. And then 2 years ago, or 1.5 years ago, somebody approached me at Google. That's where I'm working. He's also into this hobby, a guy called Manoj. And he's like, well, I have this idea, and do you want to do this? And so we talked a little bit about it. And then, as it so happened, there was then the Advanced Imaging Conference in 2019. And so we went there, and then literally in the last minute, actually through Tolga, that many of you probably know from Tolga Astro, he introduced us to another guy, Rich from Boston, who apparently talked to him and says like, well, he's thinking about it too. So he got us three together. We spent, I don't know, like half an hour or an hour talking to each other and said, okay, let's actually do this. Then we collaborated and organized, I mean, literally everything online. I think mostly via email. I don't think we actually had any Zoom meeting or anything, but trying to figure out what we want to buy. One of the good ideas that Manoj had right at the beginning was one person buys the mount, one person the camera, one person the scope, and then we can use the remaining equipment, again, from filters to cables to web power switch and everything. We use the remaining equipment to make it roughly equal, that everybody pays roughly the same amount. And so then the site that we selected, it's Dark Sky, New Mexico. As you can see here on the map, it is far south. I mean, when you're there, you see these hills, these mountains over here that are already in Mexico. And as you can imagine, it is insanely dark. Like there's nothing around it. Like you can see actually a little bit the sort of light dome from Phoenix, and somewhere here's Tucson. Yeah, it's Tucson. But that's it. Apart from that, and it's not a real light dome. It's just on one side of the horizon. You can see that there's sort of some type of shine, but for the most part, it's insanely dark. But because it's fairly close to Phoenix, you actually drive, I think, 3 hours from Phoenix to the site here. So it was also, you can go there. And again, from here, we can fly, I mean, it's like 45 minutes or an hour. I can't remember how long the flight is. So also having something where we can actually get to fairly easily. And of all the sites that we sort of looked into, it was actually one of the cheapest sites. We pay, I can't remember exactly, like something like $400 a month to have our scope there, which is then, again, power, internet, having the scope there, everything around it. And again, they have people on site. So if something small happens, we can just ask them to do it, like to check if the cable is unplugged or something. This is the site itself. Here, this big white building, that's the main farmhouse where the couple who is running this enterprise lives. This here with the red roof, that's where our scope is in. And all these are basically smaller buildings that they have, all with these roll-off roofs that roll off in the evening, where people have their other telescopes. So this is one of the larger buildings. When we got in there, they have space for 9 telescopes, and we were the 8th. And I think by now they actually rented out the 9th one. And so the next thing that they do is they will build another house somewhere here. What we didn't realize is, like, the staff there, again, the couple who's running it, they're insanely friendly, insanely supportive. Like, she actually invited us for dinner pretty much every evening when we were there. which was awesome. But yeah, when we needed something at the beginning or while the telescope is there or something, they're insanely friendly, really try to make it work. Super helpful with absolutely everything. Over here, this is a trailer. This is where Al lives. Al is the guy who runs all the IT in that for Dark Sky, New Mexico. He's actually the former communications officer of Air Force One. So this guy knows everything about electronics and cables and what have you. And then Michael, the guy who owns this, he's actually a former Corps of Engineer sergeant or something. So he knows everything about mechanics. So both of these two together, lots and lots of knowledge, super helpful. The other thing that we also didn't know is they have a full machine shop there. Like all kinds of tools anyway, but really a machine shop where you can do everything. So when we needed something, either we had it or at some point we needed to drill some holes for, I think, one of the plates or something, not a big deal. They have everything there, super useful. So we didn't even have to bring any tools. They have absolutely everything there. And then the final piece, and this is something that was cool, they have really good accommodation. In many of these places, you have nothing. Like when you go there, you either stay in your car, or maybe you come with a tent, or you have to drive every night, again, 40, 50 miles to the nearest Airbnb or something. Here they actually have a couple of buildings. This here is actually a building where you have these small rooms, and here's another building where you can stay. And so that is super awesome. That in the evening when you're done, again, it's very dry, you're tired and everything, you have a proper place to go in, you have an air-conditioned place, a proper bed. This was really, really cool. And so then we talked a lot about, so what type of equipment do we want to get? And of course, you do this, you put it up there in this dark environment. So of course, you try to put together the best possible equipment that you can afford and that you want to have. So a PlaneWave CDK14, the 10 micron GM3000, that's not 300, it's 3000 mount, an FLI 5100 microline camera, 65 millimeter filters because it's a really big chip, Moonlight night crawler focus, so like everything from the best. And then the cool thing was they told us at the site, we can ship everything there and they will keep it for us. So when we come there, we don't have to bring a lot of stuff, but that they have everything there and we can use it there. Well, the downside is we got our hands on all the equipment for the very first time when we actually arrived at the site. So we spent an insane amount of time before we went to trying to make sure we have all the adapters, all the cables, everything, checked it twice, 3 times, 4 times, making sure that everything fits together, that plates, everything is there. But yeah, basically what you have to do is, this is our pier, how it was when we came, just a pier, nothing around it. You go from this to this in 7 days. And as you can imagine, like it's, again, a lot of work, and especially because you put it together for the first time. So you will make mistakes, you will have to do things again. So that was really, really intimidating. Once we realized when we came there and we saw all these crates with the mount, with the scope and everything, we're like, oh my gosh, we really have to figure this out. First 2 days went amazingly well. There was pretty much no hiccup. We got the mount up. Getting the mount up, by the way, was huge. This thing is super, super heavy. So just getting it from the ground on this platform, from the platform up here, again, it is super heavy. It doesn't have a handlebar or anything. So that was just a challenge by itself. But we got the mount up, the scope, all the imaging trained, the focuser, filter wheel camera, filters into the filter wheel, guide scope, cabling. We're pretty much at the end of the second day. At the end of the second day at night, we actually had a session with the scope to trying to figure out how do we do polar alignment and everything. But then the one thing that we saw and we tried to ignore, this is the roof of the observatory. And if we moved the scope so that it's really pointing high up, there were like 2 inches between the scope and the roof here. And everybody was really, really uncomfortable about it. again, something happens, like can the scope get stuck there? Can, again, something lower a little bit? So I said, initially we tried to ignore it, but then we agreed, okay, let's take everything down. And then again, Michael knew everyone. There's a guy nearby who is actually designing or building these piers for him. So he was like, look, I can get this pier over there. He will cut it, take some part out, I think take 5-6 inches out, and then weld it back together again. So we took everything down. He brought it over there. And then the next day when we picked it up, like this was like a scene out of Mad Max. It was unbelievable. Like it's in the middle of the desert there, and there's a small oasis with some trees. And he has this shop, and he actually builds these things that, again, look like something from Mad Max. And he actually offered us, like, this is actually one, this to drive around there, but we didn't have the time. And here's then the pier, and here you can see, like, he cut something out, welded it back together, and then we moved it back. And so now we had to set up everything again. And I never know how videos work through Zoom, so hopefully you can see something. This is a time lapse now. Does the video come through?
Yep, we see the video.
That's it.
Looks good.
Getting the pier first up there, leveling the pier. Michael helped with that. Now we have the mount. Rich first puts these plates on it. We need to put the mount on top of it. Some point, I think we take a break in a second. Quick break.
That's when Mark has to go comb his hair.
Quick up, lifting this mount up there. As I said, it looks easy here, but putting everything back on, counterweights. Next thing is the plates. For the scope, cables. Yeah, right. We have to put the cables first through the mount before we put on the plates at the top. Got the plate up there, putting the scope up, some cables, more cables. I think next is the imaging train. Oh yeah, guide scope, guide camera, cabling that up. Now the imaging train, we left it together, so focuser, filter wheel, everything, cables. Now everything is up there. Next you can see, this is something that the 10 micron mount does. It basically has a program that tells you if your scope is fully balanced in both directions. This is what it was when it sort of moves it forwards, backwards. Yep. That's basically it. And then just getting all the software and everything back installed, some of the cables, making sure that everything is there. That was it. So we managed to put everything back together in less than 2 hours, which was pretty amazing. So at the end of the third night, we basically had the scope set up how we needed it. But then it's still an insane amount of stuff. And again, it's something that you totally underestimate because we usually set our scopes up in our backyards or something. And so we do this over many, many weeks and sometimes months. Again, install the software and everything. And here just software starting from, like, I mean, ASCOM, just the basic package, all the drivers, doing the network configuration, port forwarding that we can go to it from the outside, installing all the software, timesync, Dimension 4, the plane wave software, then the imaging software, TSX, polar alignment itself. We spent, I think, one night figuring out how to do the polar alignment, and then one night actually do the polar alignment. Then doing the web power switch, the flat panel, as you can see here. So we mounted the flat panel actually to drive towards the end of the week to get this mount here. We forgot that we need something like this. So this is a TV mount. And then we put the flat panel up here, and then we have basically the parking position of the scope such that it points to the flat panel. So in the parking position, we can take our flat images. And then we installed a small webcam that we can basically see everything. So after 8 days, Rich and I left. One thing that happened in the middle, actually, two things we didn't have. There was one cable for the 10 micron mount and an adapter for the guide camera. And Manoj was pretty bummed. He couldn't come, but it was super cool that he could actually go to my place, get the cable from one of my mounts. He still had an adapter for the camera, and then he could FedEx it over there, that we, I think on the 7th day, got everything, and we could then put everything together. So it felt pretty good, had everything done. One thing that happened on the last day on the flat panel after we installed it, that the control box that we had for the flat panel blew up. So we had to take this off. So we couldn't take flats with the flat panel, but then we thought, okay, we can take at least sky flats initially. And so the first experience is the FLI or the FL5100. I mean, it's an awesome camera. It's basically two chips, two really large chips together, but it has the unfortunate effect that both chips have very different characteristics, both halves of the chip. It has quite a lot of defects. Like there's lots of,
I don't know if I would call it awesome though, Mark. It's like it has 5 features and 10 usability issues. You know, it's like one of those cameras where it's like it's a square law almost on the usability issues. I don't know. It was an expensive camera. We tried it because the chip was big and the field of view is narrow and all that. But I think so far, we kind of hit an issue every week almost. It's not. I don't know. It's like maybe there's an easier camera to use actually.
Yeah, and it turns out it is a camera that really stretches FLI too. Like they don't have a lot of experience with it. And so when we talk to them how to take flats or anything, they're like, we really don't know. Like we put this together because it creates an awesome field of view, but you're basically on your own. So yeah, I think the majority of our time, you're right, Manoj, we probably spend on the camera trying to figure something out with it. And then we realized we can't really take sky flats because of the two different halves. We have completely different characteristics. We couldn't figure out, I mean, in theory, you should be able with proper darks and bias frames, you would think that you are able to get the two different halves here out of the darks and bias frames. We could never figure this out. We could never figure it out to do a calibration that it basically equalizes both halves. The other thing that we then found is that our dark and bias frames weren't really dark. That, I mean, the camera has a shutter, but it doesn't shut completely. So we realized at some point that we actually have some artifacts, usually in the middle of the image, that it's not fully dark. And so we started to take images anyway. One thing that we realized, guiding didn't work. And we suspected that something is loose on the guide scope, on the guide camera. Unguiding, we still don't know why. We can't get up to 30 minutes one by one images. Like 50% of the images have like elongated stars. It's it doesn't stay on it. And then the PlaneWave software, the main thing that we use it for, it actually has mirror heaters to make sure that no dew forms. Theory, it shouldn't happen too often, but it can get actually pretty cold there at night sometimes. And so it's a software that's pretty cool, that basically keeps the mirrors just slightly above ambient temperature. So it has a sensor outside, and it has sensors on the mirrors itself. But one thing that we had is it actually crashed pretty much every night after we used it for a little bit. And what it turned out to be, Tolga also told us this, that it actually needed too much power. And so when the heating kicked in, and then we did something else with the mount or with the scope, the mount or focusing or something, it actually exceeded it, and then the software crashed. So I had to go back. So then I went back 2 or 3 months later with my wife. She actually loved it. It's pretty beautiful down there. So we spent a couple of days, replaced the flat panel. The control box had the same issue again. It blew up again. And so what it did is, when we moved the flat panel to, I think it has 250 steps, when we moved it above 100, the fuse basically blew off the control box. And I went through, I don't know, 5 or 6 different fuses. And then I had 2 left until I realized what happened. And then we at least took calibration files manually so that I knew, okay, I can't regulate it too high. And then we covered the scope completely, took some bias and dark frames. We replaced the guide camera. The guide camera that we initially had a pretty small field of view. So it sometimes had problems to actually find the guide scar. Tightened the guide scope, hopefully hope that we can get the issues like flexure out of it. Installed a second power supply, and then redid the whole polar alignment. And pretty much as it was the first time, all these things usually take a little bit longer. Then one night it was not clear. So finished everything literally in the last minute, but didn't have the time to really do one full imaging run to say like, okay, let's take, again, proper images. Let's see if absolutely everything worked. I thought it worked. So we had now one set of calibration frames. Guiding still didn't work, and we couldn't figure it out until today why it doesn't work. It's basically it has to be some differential flexure. But I tried everything. I mean, when I was there the second time, I checked every screw that is between the scope and the guide scope and the camera. I tightened everything like crazy. When I do something, I can't see any play, but somewhere there is some play. I then wrote a Pix Insight script to basically equalize these two halves. So it basically takes from every script, you basically mark a dark region in your images and say like, okay, measure the level at these dark regions where there's no stars, figure out what the difference is, and basically multiply everything on one side of the image with this factor to get both halves at the same level. And then I had to go through it and manually mark all the bad columns that are in the sensor. Cool thing is, this is the first, and I have to say, so far only image that we got out of the scope of M51 that we took. I mean, once everything is together, it is amazing what the scope does. Like again, it's the location, it's dark, the scope itself, I mean, I took images of M51 before. This was just absolutely unbelievable to see the amount of detail that we get, the dust lanes, the galaxies in the background and everything.
Yes, I just want to say, I mean, the same image, I mean, this is a fairly big and bright target, right? But look at the sort of dust loops that we can get from that sky. It's almost insane. Like, I mean, I don't know if Mark, you can highlight the dust loop on the lower part of the.
Yeah,
I mean, I've never seen that before. Even if you go on Astrobin, you don't see that, right? Yeah. And this wasn't even like, I don't think we had a lot of hours on this either, right, Mark? Like 6 hours, something like that.
It's nothing extraordinary. Yeah.
Yeah, it's insane. I mean, so the spot is really good.
Yeah.
I think the challenge is the equipment, right? And getting that dialed in, especially during COVID times, where we cannot travel all that much. But yeah, Mark and Rich did all the heavy lifting, literally, pun intended.
You know, and that's a cool thing. Like the images that you can take at these locations, I mean, it blows everything away that I know of, even from star parties. Again, even at star parties, you have some stray light there. Actually, the second time we were there, as I said, this one night, it was actually overcast. And from the observatory to the place where we stayed, this house, it's like 200 or 300 feet. And I wanted to walk from the observatory to our house, and it's pitch dark. You couldn't see anything. Like, I've never been in a place where it's just absolutely dark, where you don't even see like some contours or something. It's just dark. So yeah, it is cool. And the air, because down there in South New Mexico, it's pretty high up, so the air is really, really calm. So that's the other thing, that there's not much turbulence or anything. So it's actually, from the location, it's a pretty fantastic site. And yeah, so what we have now is, so as I said, we still have the differential flexure. So we decided, after trying it twice, it's probably something that we can't figure out. So we will replace it with an off-axis guider. We use ACP, which for this type of observatory, on one side, it's awesome because you basically enter some targets and ACP figures out which target is high enough in the sky, how much images can I take, it moves to the other ones, it does all the scheduling itself, together with the with the observatory, they basically put like a small file there that we can then use to see if the roof is open or not. So it starts up itself. It calls the whole startup routine. So it does everything. So it's amazing when it works, but it also seems to be one of these software ACPs that's kind of finicky. Like it crashes from time to time. The other thing is the scheduling. Again, on one side, it's awesome that it does it, but we now have, I can't remember, like 15 targets, and only 1 or 2 targets are fully imaged. All the other ones are like 70% done, 80% done, 90%.
No, but Mark, that's probably my fault though. I mean, it's actually, once you get the hang of it, it's actually pretty, I mean, it's just an algorithm, right? At the end of the day, it's nothing magical, but it does exactly what it's supposed to do. It's just that, if you look at our targets, right, a lot of them, we either intentionally or unintentionally have horizon constraints or moon constraints that don't fire, right? And as a result, it doesn't image them.
Yeah.
We even have like rising plan delays and things like that. It's basically 2 things I want to say about ACP, right? I mean, the software UX, like the user experience and the interface, is pretty crap, right? We should just put it out there. It's like 1960s car, can they have their UI back, right? It's like pretty terrible. But at its core, though, it's fairly stable. It crashes whenever it depends on a lot of things, right? It depends on a lot of ASCON drivers, devices being connected, being on the same COM port. Like there's a whole bunch of things. Any of that changes, it will crash, right? That's pretty much all it can do. There's nothing much it can do. And as a result, we're seeing some of those crashes, but I think we can clean that up, right? Once the scheduling works, though, I mean, I have targets which are running for more than a year at this point. So, these may be winter targets or whatever, and I have 100 hours. 50 happens in 2020, 50 happens in 2021, right? But it's kind of nice that you can actually do that over multiple years and still collect like massive quantities of data, right? With optimal conditions. I just want to say that because it's not. I don't think the software is buggy, right? It's not. It's just very convoluted to use, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it depends on weather files. I mean, just last week, I think Mark and I and Rich, we realized they changed the location of the weather file, so it couldn't access the weather file anymore. And its default assumption, which by the way, it's the right thing to do. If I can't hit a weather file that's recent, I'm going to assume everything is unsafe. So it assumed everything was unsafe, and it didn't image anything for like 6 days, right? But that's not necessarily the software's fault, right? It's just we don't know where the weather file is and if it's safe to image. So it has some nuances that you need to know. But it works for the most part. If you get it dialed in, it's actually pretty nice to be able to enter targets for the next 5 years, right? I have on my home observatory, I have 60 targets at this point. And it just images whatever is right at the right time. And some targets finish. Of course, you need to have a 10 TB drive. But whenever something finishes is when I process it, right? But it is challenging to get it up and running to a reasonable speed in the beginning, though.
As you can hear, Manoj and I have slightly different opinions about ACP.
So I got a question. So when you get crashes and crap like that, are you able to deal with it remotely? Okay. You can, worst case, power cycle the computer and it comes back up and you're at least able to debug and stuff. You ever have any issues where the remote aspect of the computer is a problem?
Yeah, so far we only had one instance where we had to ask the guys on site to restart the computer. Because what we have is we have the web power switch, so we can remotely turn everything on and off. And then again, the moment the computer gets turned on, it reboots and everything. So it should work. What didn't work the other day, and we couldn't figure out really why it was actually a problem that, I think it was 2 problems. Somehow our computer was stuck. and we couldn't get any longer to the web power switch. And so we had to ask them to just restart everything, and then we restarted it, and then we could get back to it. So yes.
Yeah, but for the most part, if it crashes, restart usually just fixes it. I mean, what I've noticed is ACP crash, like, let's say underneath it, right, it's using a 10 micron driver, right? In our case, it's using a 10 micron driver, it's using the FLI ASCOM driver, right? If one of those crashes, there is no graceful degradation, right? It'll just crash. The whole thing will just crash. And unfortunately, the only way to recover is to restart everything. But yeah, for the most part, restarting everything seems to work. I mean, in preparation, Mark knows this, right? In preparation for this, I ran pretty much the same setup here in my backyard. And the goal was to never go into the observatory, right? Just everything is robotic. So it was pretty much the same setup. And it would crash all the time. At 10 micron, I was using some version of the driver, which had some issue where if you connected both the Ethernet port and the RS-232C, it would crash. Like, it's just this weird bug that the 10 micron driver has, where if both of these interfaces are active and you did a specific command sequence, it would crash, right? But what you see on a real life use case is that ACP crashed and your sequence halted, right? And you start unwrapping that turducken and you realize, oh, yeah, this is what it is. You fix the driver, then ACP is behaving fine. The other situation is, sometimes if it's not able to control certain devices, but it's executing scripts, but it's not, the script fails, it'll fail, right? So there are those things that you have to, the underlying things that you have to fix. But if you assume that everything that it depends on is perfect, it'll keep working, right? I mean, it's mostly just an automation, time-based automation stuff. But it does take getting used to, right? And to Mark's point, the question really is it simpler for us to go every night and just bootstrap everything and pick a target and run it and shut it down in the morning? This is the question, right? I mean, you could use something like, I don't know, SGP Pro, or there was another one, Mark, I think that you had brought to attention, right? Which was newer, which have much better user experience. Yeah, they have much better user interfaces, stuff like that. The one reason I keep coming back to ACP and using it is because of the kind of fill it and forget it kind of a user experience, right? In the sense that you can just enter targets. You don't even have to care when it's going to be up, right? It could be up in December, you're sitting in April, you go hit the target and you enter it, and it'll image it in December, right? So that's sort of what happens for me is, I go look at an APOD picture or some, I don't know, like Astrobin image of the day or whatever. The target looks interesting. I just go enter it into ACP and it'll image it whenever it's right to image it, right? So that sort of automation is the only reason I keep coming back to it. But to Mark's point, it is a warthog, and you kind of have to love a warthog to be able to get around those issues. But once you do and it keeps working, like, I mean, right now in the one in San Jose, I haven't had to go in about, I don't know, 8 months, 9 months. I haven't gone into the observatory, right? But it's running every night. It comes up at sunset, 15 minutes after sunset, whatever, images the right targets and then shuts down. If there isn't enough work, it does the right thing, stuff like this. But to get there, it took me a year and a half, right?
But you keep talking about ACP, but it actually forces you to use Maxim DL to do the actual.
It does, and that's a big downside, I think. I agree with you. I mean, Maxim is another warthog, right? I mean, it's just this thing that tried to do way more than it was supposed to do, and it's got like all these artifacts which are insanely painful. And you're right. I mean, that is a downside. Like, there are these downsides, right? That you have to use Maxim. But with my Maxim right now, I'm just using ASCOM driver. It's pretty much just a image acquisition tool, right? I don't do any guiding or anything like that with Maxim. So it's primarily just a mechanism to acquire pixels, right? But yes, you're right. It does have that shortcoming, right?
Yeah, it seems like there needs to be a new ecosystem for this kind of thing, because those two tools are really aging and insist on using each other.
Yeah, the one thing that the one thing that we looked into, it's unfortunately not there, is this other program called Voyager, which I started to use for my telescopes here in the backyard. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a scheduler yet. They're basically working on that too. Basically, it's a similar idea to ACP, where you have one program that basically just takes care of all the imaging, and then a second program that says, okay, I tell you which image to take, where to go, how many frames to take, and everything. That, at least from my experience so far, is also a questionable UI, but it's much more stable, and it's really well thought through. But yeah, the full automation. But again, full automation, I would say once a week you have to pay attention to something that ACP does or doesn't do. We have to look in. Sometimes, again, as we found out now, it's like, hey, the file wasn't updated, the weather file, so it didn't take any images. ACP doesn't send you a message saying like, hey, the file seems to be outdated. For all we know, it looks like, well, it maybe was cloudy every night, so it didn't take any images. So as I said, like, it does most of it automatically, but you still have to pay quite a lot of attention actually to make sure that it works. And maybe over time it will get better, but at least so far, it's, yeah.
You need to have a Manoj on the team, right? I mean, to be frank, I'm with you guys on all of the downsides it has, and to Mark's point, I actually tried to replicate everything that the ACP does in SGP Pro. Okay, I mean, basically what I did was I took all the targets that I had entered into scheduler, and I recreated those targets in SGP in a single what do you call it, project or whatever, right? With different start times and start dates and all that. Like I tried to do it. It was just way more work, right? It was easier to fix the underlying issues and make them stable and just have ACP do its thing. Like the weather file, those are controllables, right? Like those are things you can control, and it's a one-time fix, right? If you just make sure that the weather file is always in the same place, you don't actually have to go back and tweak ACP. It just work. So when I had full control of the system, like in my observatory, I just fixed the underlying things and just used ACP. But if you do have these sort of variables that are outside of ACP, then it's probably very painful to use, right? I mean, which so far it's been painful to use in New Mexico compared to in San Jose, which is very different experiences. And that's mostly because of the underlying systems.
And that's exactly it. Like, it's something, it's amazing. I was quite surprised when we set this up, how many things I can't easily fix. Because again, we have our scopes in our backyard, and I thought I have my scopes fully automated, but apparently I go quite often out there and do something. Filter a cable that's stuck or something. So just figuring all this out, that it's super reliable, runs every night, doesn't crash and everything, it's actually quite a lot of work. Yeah, the other thing that we have is, as I said, like I had to sort of mark all these bad columns in our chip manually. And what I then realized when we took more images, these bad columns, they are not stable. And it's not that we get more and more over time. It's actually some bad columns are suddenly good columns again. And we reached out to FLI. They couldn't explain it. They couldn't figure it out. So it means for every image, we basically have to go through it. Like you go through all your frames and check where do you have a bad column that you can calibrate it out. And so this led us that we said, maybe we need to get a different camera. This camera is just way too finicky.
I'm really surprised that FLI isn't standing behind their product. I mean, their reputation is that they make the best cameras out there. And I understand we're a small part of their revenue, but how can they claim to be the best and sell cameras that are like 10 grand when you have problems right out of the box, and they just kind of say, gee, sorry, not our problem.
Yeah. You know, so it's actually FLI, no, hang on. FLI was actually bought 2 years ago. Yeah. And the guy who ran it actually stepped down. He's not with the company. And the new company just looks purely at the revenue. If they actually go to the FLI website, they discontinued 80% of their cameras and 80% of their filter wheels. They just, I mean, shrank it down much
right?
smaller.
It's microscopy that they're focused on now.
Yeah.
But Bruce, to your point, right, when we met back in SIG, right, which is when Mark and I actually came up, we kind of figured out we would do an observatory in New Mexico. When I went to their booth and I showed them one of the images I captured with the 5100, the first thing he said, Gary, was, "Oh, wow, look at that, no seam." Now, back then, I didn't realize the significance of what he was saying, but now I do, right? Because they probably heard it from every one of their customers. And I hadn't done much to fix it, right? In fact, I ended up doing a VC with one of the engineers, and they tried to look at it. They were showing me some of the calibration tests that they're doing, and you could still see the seam, right? I mean, the point I'm trying to make is it a problem big enough for them to fix, right? And I contend that from a revenue perspective, it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, and since they were bought, I think it's very clear that the focus is now on, again, medical equipment and wherever they need these cameras, but it's not. Again, I think since Jim left, again, he's into astrophotography himself. And I think since he left, it's basically just a sideshow for them. But yeah, it's kind of sad. The other thing that we now saw in some of the images recently is this effect here that we have in the upper third, like different levels and this weird thing in the middle. And we can't figure that out. And this is not in every image. So there's no way that we can calibrate this out. And yeah, so as I said, I think with the camera, sooner or later, we'll probably say, like, look, let's get a different camera. Let's get something that's more established, more tested, more stable.
You know, if it was like this out of the box, though, I would hope that they could take it back, or if you got it from Tolga, that he would stand behind it, because, you know, that's a big investment.
It is, yeah. I bought it directly from them. Maybe I should contact them and see if they'll take it back. I don't think they will, to be honest. I mean,
yeah, at this point, probably not.
Yeah.
So yeah,
but it's okay. It's like basically that the one that Mark is showing right now, it's completely perplexing. I'm not sure what that is. We have to figure that out. But the seam has always been there from day one, right? And their claim was always that your calibration frames would take care of it. And it would, depending on the signal level and all that. But once you start moving into a dark sky spot, you're imaging things that have very low signal. And so that channel gain difference that you have starts showing up more prominently, right? And to Mark's point, the challenge with that seam, and he knows how I used to deal with it before, I would just deal with it by hand, right? There was no script, nothing. After stacking, I would just correct it. But when you stack, right, the seam is moving because of dithering or whatever, it's moving between the frames. It's kind of like you have this band, actually. It's not even a seam anymore. It's a band that you have to correct. It's still possible, though, and it's not too bad. But you get this massive field of view, right? And it's low noise and all of that. But these kind of issues, like, you know, which are not predictable, is the one that's really hard, right? Where, you know, you start having new dark columns or light columns and like hot pixels, whatever, or like this kind of stuff where you just start having random bands. That's the hard part, is like, there's no way to deal with that, right? Because it changes image over image, and like we can't every set, like it's just so much work to process. Like, you know, Mark or Rich, if they have to process their images, it's just insane amount of work, right? We got to go and do this all by hand.
Yeah.
Regarding the bad columns, I've noticed that one of the PixInsight scripts that I've been using lately seems to figure that out and remove them without me having to go in and say, you know, column 511, 715 or whatever. You just check box, create fix bad columns and it just does it.
Let me follow up. I would love to.
Yeah.
I tried this. I could never figure this out. I spent.
Yeah, I would not have to know what this script is about.
This is autointegrate.js.
Yeah. I tried that. Yeah, the other thing, for example, was, again, coming back to FLIs, again, we can see that the two different chips have slightly different gains. Not just different levels, but also different gains. And they insist it's not possible. It's the same chip, just two different physical instances of the chip, but they should have exactly the same gain. And we're like, look, we can see it, we can measure it. But yeah, it just means FLI literally doesn't know how to calibrate things, which, as I said, it's bad, but they don't sell the camera any longer either. So as I said, for them, I think this is not something that they will spend a lot of time trying to help us with.
Yeah, Bruce, if you're interested, I'm setting the camera.
Yeah. The other thing that we then had was, let me actually go back here. Yeah. That we then realized we have to move our flat panel much, much closer to the scope. Because right now, if we do it like this, we actually don't get the chip evenly illuminated. We get vignetting on top of the scope, vignetting on the sides. And as you can see, it's quite a lot of distance that we have to cover here. So we have to figure out how to put this whole mount and move it, sort of a solid foot or something closer to the scope. The second challenge that we have is this wall here. It's not 100% stable. Like, it's quite often pretty windy there, and this wall moves a little bit back and forth. So if we now move our flat panel really close to the scope, at some point this wall moves and then it will actually hit the scope.
You can try a heavy-duty light stand, maybe, that you could mount it to.
We actually talked to them. Michael, the guy who's running it, doesn't like the idea that something is standing on the floor, because they sometimes have to go into the building to clean it or to repair something. And he doesn't want to have anything that he accidentally might knock over or might kick or something. So
What about from the pier?
That's something that we discussed. This is something where then Al chimed in and he's like, look, if you do it on the pier, you put sort of an uneven load on the pier. And he was very uncomfortable with the idea. And normally I would say, like, well, it's a pretty stable pier. Al was the guy who told us from day one, look, your scope is too close to the roof. I think you will have to take it down. I ignored Al's advice once and it was pretty bad. So I'm like, you know something about this. If you tell me this could cause issues, then it might cause issues. So I might not push it.
I guess a flip flat would be another possible approach, right? It's mounted on the OTA.
Right.
Not for a truss tube, but this size though.
Yeah, unfortunately, flip flaps are not made in that size. So we have to do this. So
and a truss tube, right? It's not made for a truss. I mean, it actually, because this is a truss tube scope, you know, the way you do the flip flat is you have to tighten that zip tie, whatever. It's actually going to put undue stress on the trusses. So we investigated flip flats, to be honest, right?
Yeah, so Michael told us that this wall, they will make it much more stable, because I think they were even getting a little bit afraid of it, how much it moves. So hopefully they make this wall more stable, and then we can somehow figure out, again, how to basically put a wooden block here or something to move this panel really, really close to the scope. But yeah, that's one thing that we have to figure out. We have a new control box for the flat panels that actually shouldn't have this issue any longer. So main thing is we have to do another trip down there.
Regarding your need to go to an off-axis guider, I know that you voiced displeasure with off-axis guiders in the past. I have had bad luck with off-axis guiding also, and I don't know if it would work with your CDK, your scope, but the OnAg has worked wonders for me. As far as being able to use the whole frame for guiding, and just works really well. And you can also use it for focusing if you want to.
Yeah.
So that might be something worth investigating if you can fit it in your imaging train.
Yeah, the problem is
again, sorry, I missed it. Can you say that again, Bruce?
The OnAg,
yeah,
on-axis guiding.
Size though. I mean, with the 5100, I have an OnAg. It doesn't cover the full chip. But if you switch to a different camera, yeah, that is. By the way, I have to say, I don't know. I try to use OnAg. I've had it for about 4 years now. I've never managed to use it successfully. This software is just too painful. I don't know. Like maybe it's just me. I'll just say in my own defense that I have used ACP, and that's pretty painful as well. I just don't know. I couldn't get OnAg to work. Right? It's just super painful to get it to work.
Glenn and I use it.
Yeah.
It does definitely work, but they have a newer version of the software also that came out.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, this chip wouldn't work with OnAg. I already investigated. But if you went to a different chip, that is an option that we can consider. And I guess it also gives you focus assistance, right? Because it has that
focus lock.
Yeah, the focus lock.
Yeah, and not that I've been 100% successful, but I'm not much of a machinist or whatever. But I've been goofing around with making my own OnAg, so you can buy a cold mirror in whatever size you need if you've got a 3-inch image circle or whatever, and do the machining and everything. But that's a pretty major project, but it is doable.
The theory that we went in with right, is that we don't need guiding. To be like, I'll just
that was not my theory. Just to put it out there, these guys. I'm like, look, let's have a guider. We don't know how it works. Like, oh no, this is stable enough.
Yeah, I mean, Rich and I were like, look, this mount can do unguided. Okay, let's just go unguided, right? And then Mark was like, no, we should at least have a backup. We can't go there on a day's notice, right? I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm running the exact same mount here, and it's running unguided for about 2 years now, right? And I've only polar aligned it once. So there is something to be said. I mean, the mount, I think, can do it. It's just that you have to get so many other things right before it can actually be fully unguided, right? At like sub-pixel precisions and all that. Which is, I mean, this field of view, I think the pixel resolution is half an arc second, right, Mark? I think it's about half an arc second.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it does put a lot of demand on the model that you create in 10 micron, but it's, it's getting there, right? It has the precision to be able to do it. It's just, we are not there yet, right? So we do have a guider, but maybe, I mean, now we got a Sagitta, right? I think we're going to try that next for the guider, and we'll see. The other thing also is, if we remove that, the one we're using is a Takahashi really long focal length guider, because we wanted to match it to the field of view, right? And that obviously is like, it has really long moment arms, right? When we go with Sagitta, we're going to be removing that. And that probably may make it a little bit more stable as well in terms of the kind of moments it's putting on the mount, right? Because we saw these things, I don't know, Mark, if you didn't have it in your slides, but didn't we see these things where in one direction it would have worse start rails in another direction? So there were some indications that maybe something was dragging it in one direction of tracking, right? It wasn't strictly related to just imbalance or anything. So I don't know. I mean, it's a lot of experiments to do still, I think.
Yeah.
But again, it's the same thing again. It's like, so we do all our homework trying to figure it out, which adapter do we need, which off-axis guider, which camera and everything. In the end, it will be the same thing again. It's like you have, I don't know, a few days, integrate it, and hopefully it works, because then you leave again. That's really the thing that I definitely underestimated. Like, again, if you really can't just go and do something small, or try this out, or integrate this or something, it's like you take something and it basically has to work pretty much out of the box. You don't have a lot of time to integrate it, troubleshoot it or something.
So Mark, you're a
it definitely doesn't help that you can't easily fly there. I think otherwise we might have flown out there a little bit more often.
Mark, you're a Googler. So what's your post-mortem here? I mean, a lot of people have remote observatories. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think yours is on the lower end of experiences. So, what would you, like, I mean, So obviously you'd get a different camera, but is there a higher level, you know, maybe you shot too high? What do you think? What's your, you know,
So I think one thing that we should have done is, and this is actually something coming back to this guy, L, that's what he told us what we should do is, I think what you should do is don't ship all your stuff to the remote site and then assemble it there. Ship it to someone, assemble it where you can really take your time, figure everything out, all the screws, all the cables, everything. Make it basically work in your backyard, and then disassemble it and send it. I think that would have been probably, that would have made our trip easier, and we probably would have seen a couple of these issues that we then saw that you then on site can't easily troubleshoot and can't easily fix. That I think is one of the things. It's fairly expensive to ship it first here and there, but I think that's worth doing it. And that's actually, as I said, that's what they recommended. That they said, like, look, do it first and then package it up and send it here. And we knew better.
Yeah, we kind of tried to do that actually, in the sense that, I mean, we replicated the mount and the camera, but not the scope, right? Which is a big part of it. I ran the same camera on the same mount here, but I ran it on a refractor, right? With a much broader field of view.
No, but the whole thing, I mean, the focuser was new to us. The guide scope and everything. So, I mean, the guide scope, the differential flexure, we probably could have figured this out if we had it set up somewhere else. I mean, it's fairly obvious once you.
I agree. Yeah, replicating the setup somewhere else, or doing the setup somewhere else first, weeding out all the bugs so you know exactly sort of what are the issues you're gonna have, would be way easier once you go remote, right? Because everything becomes a little bit harder once you're remote. Even if you're SRO, right? That's still like 3 hours drive plus, I don't know, sleeping in your car, right? It's not easy. And I think, you better be very quick to sort of get to the root of the problem and fix it, which is harder for us right now because we don't have a replica of this with one of us, right?
I think the other thing, again, this is where we were lucky, again, that they have the full machine shop there and everything. We didn't expect it. We didn't realize we wouldn't need it. Again, I think if you put your scope somewhere, really understand the site really well. What is there? What can they help you with? We were super lucky that we had, again, 2 people on site that could help us. The guy who could like cut down the pier and weld it again. Like, we were lucky that this all worked because they have literally everything there, but not every site is sort of similarly equipped. And I think that's the other thing that I would make. Next time I would do it in a different site, I would make sure that I understand really, really well everything that the site has and offers and everything that I have to bring or I have to take care beforehand. Yeah, I think those are the 2 main things.
Having a hosting site that has an expert in the networking is fantastic, but it would be even more helpful to have somebody who can really engineer your mount and scopes and get rid, help you solve the problems that you're having. So,
I mean, actually, they offered us to do it, but in the end, it's like, do I now want somebody else to figure all the stuff out? I mean, for him, it's also new. We're like, look, it's, again, I think that's the thing. All this equipment is so proprietary that it would probably take him almost as much time as us to figure this out. I actually think I have to say, like, having the 2 guys, Michael, who knows everything that there is about mechanical engineering, and having Al that knows everything that is about electrical and network engineering. I think that was probably the most helpful thing that we could use. These are things that I'm just not good at. I'm good at with computers. I'm fairly good with the equipment, but these are things that I would struggle with, and that was fantastic.
Well,
at the same time, I mean, this might sound like, boy, that's like, it's cool. Like, going there, setting it up, being at the site. I mean, again, most of us, we are in it not just to take cool images. Most of us are in it to tinker around with the equipment.
Sure. You
definitely do that. Like, I enjoy every minute that I spend on this thing, even if I sometimes think, man, it would be nice if it would just work. Still pretty cool. Like, you log in, you have this thing remotely, you can see it through your webcam, it points, it does things. You have the super dark sky. It's pretty cool.
And Mark, it's also fair to say that if we were, this wasn't 2020. I mean, unfortunately, our timing wasn't all that great. We didn't talk to COVID before we didn't kind of coordinate. If this hadn't happened in 2020, I don't think this presentation would have looked much different, right? I should caveat that. I think a lot of our challenges is because of COVID. We haven't been able to make as many trips as we would have liked to and fix a lot of these issues, right? Mark and Rich were gracious enough to go a couple of times, even during COVID and all that, but that made it a lot harder, right? Because even the site, wasn't allowing a lot of remote visitors. And so it made it a little bit more challenging. But if you were to do it in normal times, even with all of these issues, you would make progress much quicker, right? Literally, I think, right, Mark, you guys went in, was it April or May of 2020, right? Right after all the lockdowns.
Yeah.
That was the first setup, right? So you can imagine, some of our issues have been that as well.
Although I have to say, that was one of the cool things when we had crazy lockdowns in California and you go literally in the middle of nowhere. You feel pretty safe there. You can't get infected. Like it's
But yeah, 2020, I mean, I think that was one of the challenges as well.
we actually selected the site so that we could make fast trips. And yes, as Manoj said, we just can't. Otherwise, again, it is a site. We could go over a weekend. We could fly out Saturday morning, be there Saturday afternoon, spend the whole night, do something, and then fly back on Sunday. And it's not a big deal. Like that was exactly one of the reasons why we picked the site that's, again, accessible. And that's definitely not the thing that we could do.
Hey, I have another ACP related question if this is the appropriate time. Are you using another planning tool to populate ACP like SkyTools imaging, or you just use ACP?
Just straight up ACP. I mean, basically what we're doing is whenever we find an interesting target, we're just going and entering the coordinates and the times for it to image, the scheduler basically, from the web forms, right? So each one of us has a login and we just go in, log in and enter the targets. I don't think we've had any issues with that per se.
Oh, no. Like just setting up the user accounts. Like there were so many things at the beginning. Oh, I don't like ACP.
It took me about a week, I think, right, Mark? I kind of went in after Mark and Rich set up everything, then the Nook that we had in there and created the remote logins, etc. I went in. It took me about a week plus to get ACP up and running, right, with all the software installed and the drivers and stuff like that. I mean, I wouldn't say all of that. It's just housekeeping, right? Most of it is bookkeeping and install the right software, get it up and running. I don't think it's too painful. For the planning itself, because it's the scheduler that we're using, you don't need a separate planner, right? Because the scheduler is the planner. The premise is that you should just be able to say what you want to image and it'll image it at the right time. And that's sort of what we've been doing, except there's these other things we have to resolve, right? And one of the challenges is because we are using guiding, and someone rightfully pointed out earlier, ACP uses Maxim. Right now, the guiding is in Maxim and things like this. I mean, in theory, none of that is a real problem. But anytime you're using software that you don't normally use, like I don't normally use Maxim, right? I mean, I use something else. It's a learning curve that you have to go through. And that learning curve, some find it fun, some maybe not so much, right? But that's what it is. But I think for us, the goal was have a remote setup. Each one of us goes, finds interesting targets during our regular lives, and then we just want to be able to enter it into a database and it gets imaged. And our group rules are that everybody gets the data, right? It's not, it's not Mark entered a target, only Mark get the data. So the idea is it's sort of like a community project almost, right? So each of us go enter interesting targets, and then everybody has interesting data to process at the end of it, for which scheduler works pretty well, actually, right? Because you can just go enter targets whenever you feel like it, and it'll image it whenever it's ready, right? Whenever it's right. So the theory is promising. We just had to get it to a spot where it's humming along nicely. And I would say, we have some issues, right? Like guiding is one, the chip is another. If we resolve those two big ones, I think we're on a good trajectory.
I actually have to say that this is something that worked really well, thanks to Manoj, who sort of said at the beginning, like, look, here's the rules how we do it. Again, we share the images. We all agreed if somebody wants to leave, the group has sort of first rights to buy. So you can't just say, look, I want to leave and I take my scope. It's like if the group says, no, we would like to keep it, the group can keep it. And this might sound a little bit, I don't know, administrative, but I think it's actually pretty cool because, again, it's in the end quite a lot of money that you have there. And I think it was great that Manoj said, like, look, let's just set up these rules that we all know what we're getting into. I think the other thing that I would say, which was, I think, helpful, all three of us, Manoj, Rich, and it's not that anyone is really rich, but we never had troubles to say like, oh, somebody spent $50 more or $50 less, or I go one more time, I have to pay. Like, I think that is the other thing that made it fairly relaxing, that nobody really looked into how much time and in particular how much money everybody spends. It's like we try to make it even. Like when we now bought the off-axis guider, we said, okay, Manoj bought the guider, I bought the adapter, we take Manoj's Lodestar camera. So in the end, that makes it super relaxing that you never feel, oh my God, I spent too much, or somebody says something, or somebody else has to spend it. Like that, I think is really important, that you find people who sort of have the same attitude towards it, that this doesn't cause any issues.
Definitely important that you get along with your partners in a venture like this.
Yeah,
I think to Mark's point, right, it's almost inevitable that you're going to have unexpected expenses after your initial planning. That's the key to realize is there is going to be stuff that's going to happen, right? And so you want to be with partners. It's kind of like doing a road trip, right? You want to have the people in the car, you want to have fun. Like, you don't want them to say, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Like, when that's not going to work. And we kind of tried our best to kind of keep each person's investment about the same, but more importantly, an adapter here, an adapter there, you don't want to nitpick on that, right? That's the key. The goal is clear, right? We want to get this rig up and running, right? And I think every one of us is kind of like that. But yeah, I don't know. A lot of that actually came. I don't know if Rob is here. Is Rob here? I spoke to Rob actually of his SRO experiences when he had done it, and I don't know. I mean, he'd done it a while back, but he didn't say it in as many words, but a lot of these sort of sentiments came along, right? One of us was pulling more weight than the other. There was like all of these little things which I just wanted to resolve out of the start, right? Like, and that's, I think, and this is one of the first things I told Mark is, look, dude, like, if we do it, this is never going to happen. And I was like, yeah, you're kind of right. Yeah, you're not happen, right? So I think that's key, because the problem is if you end up getting into those sort of, I don't know, arguments, it can only go sideways, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the thing. Like, again, despite all these issues that we three have lots of fun doing it. And I think that's the main thing. It's like, again, in the end, that's why we're doing this. It's not that you do it to get, like, with minimum effort, the most perfect images. I mean, that's the goal.
Sure. So what's the driving time from here to there? Because personally, if I were you guys, I'd get an RV or something, and I'd take a rig. I'd take a portable rig down there, go down there on a new moon week, and set up my stuff and do what you normally do in your backyard, and work on your rig, and you have an excuse for a little star party and get away, And
remember, the problems go with the square of the problems go with the square of the number of rigs, right? You should know that, Bruce.
That's true, but you have to have more than one person, I guess.
No, but that's actually what Michael and Diane told us. Like, many people actually do that. They who don't have a setup there, who just visit the site, to just set up a telescope for a couple of nights and then go back. It's
Yeah, I suggested it initially, and Mark was like, "Are you crazy? It's so much easier to just fly, right?" It is a long drive. 14, 15 hours, right? It's not. I don't think it's trivial. It's. I mean, it could be fun, right? Of course, if Mark and I did it together, it would be fun. But again, it was 2020, and road trips are even more challenging than just doing a flight, right?
Sure. Well, what kind of temperature ranges do you guys see there, depending on time of year, I guess? But
so during the day, it can get really, really hot. I mean, not quite as much as Arizona because it is higher up. It gets above 100, but not that much. And then because again, it is desert and it's pretty high up. I can't remember. I think we've seen it getting like not quite to freezing, but at certain times, at certain nights, it can get close to freezing.
Yeah.
I guess unless it's monsoon season, doing is not really a problem.
There is no monsoon season.
No monsoon season there at all.
No, they have dust. They have dust season, like gypsum salt dust or whatever.
It is actually amazing. Like one time when I was there with Beth, a thunderstorm came through it, and you could see that it's raining, but the rain doesn't hit the ground.
Right. I've seen that too.
This was the weirdest experience. It's dark. You can see some rain is coming, but it stays dry on the ground. So humidity is not a problem at all.
Yeah, but the gypsum salt dust though does present a problem for open truss scopes. I mean, I think you guys saw, right, we have a shroud around it. I mean, we are inside an observatory in a dark sky spot. You don't really need a shroud, but the reason you need it is because of the dust. And I think also, right, Mark, you guys park it, like I think the way you set the parking position is it's pointed down, so the mirror actually faces down, so the dust actually doesn't settle on the mirror. Yeah. So some minor things to keep in mind, right, with these kind of sites.
Okay.
You mentioned that the site is in the middle of nowhere, and your internet requirements, I would think, would be considerable. How does the host arrange to have good internet service in the middle of nowhere?
Yeah, that is one of the coolest things. You drive there, you have no mobile signal, nothing. Then you come to the site and they have like Wi-Fi everywhere on site, and suddenly you have the best internet you ever had in your life. And I can only imagine, like, they actually recently changed it to a fiber connection. And I think they do it, it's sort of part of their investment there, that they put these internet connections from either the nearest town, or I don't know if you can get the speeds that we see through a micro connection. I don't know, but that's basically something that is part of the service that you get.
But do you think they may have had fiber run to the site?
They have no fiber. They just upgraded their internet connection.
Hey, they don't have fiber, Mark?
Yeah.
They do, right?
That's what I just said. Like 2 weeks ago, they installed a new connection that is no fiber connection. So way faster now.
Wow.
So before they had fiber, yeah, right.
Well, even without fiber and in the middle of nowhere, now you can use Starlink for for something. Maybe
it's amazing. I mean, it's not something that you expect. Like it's.
Yeah.
And then you miss the Starlink telescopes, basically, right?
Yeah, it'd be good to get an advantage from Starlink. Eventually, we'll use it.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, like I think the coolest moment was really, again, second or third night, we had the telescope together, and then Rich and I were basically in the observatory waiting for the roof to open up that we can actually start using the scope. And that moment when you sit there, you sit in a normal building with a roof, and it's the coolest thing, I have to say. Like, the roof rolls off, you have this amazing sky above you, you have 7 other telescopes who suddenly all start doing stuff. You're sitting next to your scope, you see some of the first images, and again, the moment you look up, you have the most amazing view of the Milky Way. This was, for me, by far the coolest moment. And then one night we actually then had a Zoom call with Manoj, who was at home. And he's like, man, that's cool. It's like, yeah, you have no idea how cool it is. There, it looks ridiculously cool.
It's alive, right? Everything just comes alive suddenly, you know. It's I mean, it's been fun, right? I mean, even with all the problems. I mean, we haven't done a lot of imaging. We've gotten some amount of data, which has been difficult to process and all that. But I don't know. I mean, we still had fun and learned a lot. Mark's written some code. And
yeah. Nice.
Well, that's the most important thing, definitely. You know, I was wondering, hi, are you aware of any scheduling for K-Stars ECOS?
We
You
just
know, a
have,
scheduling function for that type of thing?
we have the basic, you know, night at a time stuff, right? We don't have anything fancier than that. It's probably similar to what SGP and MENA have, that level of functionality.
Okay.
Well, as far as planning, you know, I mentioned Sky Tools for imaging, but it actually outputs in ACP language. And so in my view, somebody needs to write, you know, write a converter that puts that in a SGP sequence or a K-Stars script or whatever.
actually, that's that actually I didn't think about that. That's right. Maybe you and I can talk about it. The planner output. Maybe there's a way to ingest it into ECOS actually. The planner output is pretty much the same as what the scheduler does, except it's a little bit, I mean, the timescales are different, right? If I remember right.
I don't know what you're asking. I'm sorry.
So there's this thing called ACP Planner. And that basically what it does is for a particular night, you can enter a bunch of targets, and then it'll spit out when each one of them should be imaged, right? It's almost like that. It's kind of like a calendar entry for each target that you specified. And it does it for each night. You rerun it for the next night, it'll do it again, so on and so forth. There may be, I think what the suggestion was that to take something like that and have an integration into like ECOS or SGP, right? I mean, but you work on ECOS, so I was just saying ECOS, you use ACP Planner, you enter your targets, that spits out a plan for the night, which is then ingested directly into ECOS.
Yeah, I suppose, you know, it's just an XML file that the scheduler, the, you know, ECOS scheduler reads. So it would be an easy, you know, you just, if you could.
Yeah.
That's a trivial integration that you restart ECOS every night with a new schedule that, you know, you could, I suppose you could, you know, run the whole thing on Bash. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Now we know that you can't be sued for copyright infringement on an API, right?
That's right. That's right. Actually, the ACP file is just plain text with some, I think there's some tags on it, like hashtags, but that's about it. It should be fairly simple, actually, to translate that into the XML, actually, the JSON structure. But we'll chat later. That's a good idea, actually.
Yeah.
Then we can get away with from ACP. Just
Exactly.
ACP Planner is free.
Moving forward.
No, because that is something I have to say. That's something that the ACP scheduler does really well, that it can take a lot of constraints into account. I actually like that you set for your targets, it needs to be at least minimum height this one. The moon needs to be this far away, or the moon needs to be fully down, or depending on the phase of the moon, how far away does it need to be? Like, there's actually a lot of things that the scheduler itself really takes into account. And then I have to say, like, that's a problem that we never had, that we took an image and the image itself was bad because, again, the moon was too close, too bright, or it was not dark enough, or it was below the horizon or something. That's actually something I'm super impressed. Like, that's something that they really figured out how to.
But I wonder why, And I keep bringing up the SkyTools imaging, I guess, because I've been exposed to that more than ACP. But why does that exist with an output for ACP if ACP can do all that same stuff? Because SkyTool imaging does everything you just mentioned as well.
I think one additional thing that SkyTools does is actually, if I remember right from using it, you can also figure out how many subframes to take for a particular target, right?
Yep.
Yeah. ACP scheduler doesn't do that. So basically SkyTools, and also SkyTools is purely just, it's not in itself driving any of the astronomy programs, which is why then basically you enter a target, it figures out when to image it based on all these constraints, and also how many subframes based on the surface brightness of the target, whatever. Creates an ACP plan and then gives it to ACP, which can then actually do the automation of it, right? That's the way I understand it. Like ACP is then driving all the astronomy equipment. SkyTools doesn't do the astronomy equipment piece, right? The scheduler, on the other hand, except for the number of subframes piece, it's doing everything else, right? The only thing they don't do is, given a target, how many subframes should it have based on your chip dimensions and chip characteristics?
And how long should they be? And
they don't do that.
Glenn,
But basically what Mark, myself, and Rich use is, I have a similar spreadsheet that I created. It's a tool basically, which is using some noise characteristics and sky brightness and all that for the region. And from that, it actually spits out how many subframes we want for a particular SNR target, right? So you can say, I want an SNR target of 10, and here's sort of the sky brightness, here's sort of the target brightness, and then it'll spit out image for 30 hours with 600 second subs or whatever, right? And that's what we're using right now.
I think Francesco does something similar too.
And I mean, I'm happy to share that spreadsheet tool that I have with everybody here. I mean, it's nothing extraordinary. It just takes some characteristics of the chip and then figures out sort of what the optimal subframe length is and the total length for a particular signal to noise. The subframe length is determined based on short noise and read noise. Read noise alone, and then the full stack is based on the short noise and the other stuff.
How does it work with CMOS cameras versus CCD cameras? Because I know SkyTools had an issue where, I mean, the developer and Glenn had talked about it. And basically, it was really CCD oriented, and he really didn't know how to deal with CMOS cameras as far as judging exposure.
Same with me, actually. It's built for CCDs because they're more deterministic. With CMOS, I mean, beyond a certain threshold, though, they kind of start behaving like CCDs because it averages out, right? So once you're above sort of the minute threshold, I think it's fine. I've been using it with my CMOS, the QHY 600M, and it works just fine. But if you're under that, then I don't think the calculations hold anymore because they're doing per pixel circuits to read. CCD is not, right? So the read noise, the way it varies and all that is different between CMOS and CCD, right? I think, Bruce, you and I have spoken about this. Like with my CMOS, the one thing I'm doing is I'm using the same calculations, but I don't do bias frames. I'm just doing dark and black.
Okay. Well, and the other thing is in SkyTools for imaging, you know, he's making assumptions about binning based on CCDs, and there really isn't any advantage to, you don't get the read noise advantage from memory, you know, from the.
Yeah, you know, I don't know who this is that's speaking. It says iPhone, but
it's Glenn.
Hey, Glenn.
Hey.
One thing I'm doing with the CMOS is because, you know, it's USB 3 on the 600M at least, it's USB 3, and you guys should know this. The ML5100 is a 50 megapixel camera. It's on USB 2. The download of a single subframe takes upwards of 18 seconds, okay? It's just something to keep in mind. With my QHY 600M, it's 100 megapixels, but it's USB 3, and it takes about 3 seconds. So I'm not even doing binning anymore. I mean, I just shoot one by one. Everything is one by one. So that keeps the math simple. It also keeps my subframe length simple. And anyway, you know, the amount of chances you get to do RGB is very low anyways, right? I mean, where I'm using it now, which is here in San Jose. But even if we were to do it in New Mexico or something, because it's only 3 seconds, we'd probably just do one by one if we were to use the CMOS camera.
Yeah.
Disk is cheap, right? I mean, you don't really care about the disk space. It's really the time it takes to download images. And as long as you can download.
No, I was just talking about the assumptions in the planning software, right? That especially where he's predicting, subframes and exposure times and stuff. So, you can't do anything with the binning if you're using CMOS because he's assuming CCD.
Yeah, I've cross-validated my calculations with the Sky tools, and it seems fairly close. So I think my numbers are right, like my math is right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to share the spreadsheet.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, and I basically what I do is I just use a rule of thumb. At some point, it doesn't even matter anymore to go between targets and what this one is lower surface brightness. I'm going to adjust nothing. I mean, I just have one sort of recipe that I use for LRGB and another recipe that I use for SHO, and I just rinse repeat, right?
Yeah.
And for the most part, you may lose some faint nebulosity, whatever, but.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much what I do too. But I need to learn to, at some point with the Bortle 7 or 8 skies, you can't pick a target that's dimmer than the light pollution, no matter how many hours you're willing to put in, right? It's just not going to show up.
I know.
So.
Yeah, I think
one
final thing we just said about sort of download times and everything. That's, I think, something that we did really well. Again, saying something positive about Google. Google Drive is actually really cool how we used it. That we basically set up Google Drive with an account that we all have access to. And so Google Drive on one side, it uploads all the images immediately to the cloud, and then we can download it all to our computers. That is the one part that we never had a problem with. That's actually really cool. Like, how do we get files on and off that machine there? It just happened sort of overnight, and we all have access to it.
That's very nice.
That is the one thing that we figured out. The file transfer and sharing, yay.
But what about edge computing?
Nope, nothing fancy like that.
Yeah.
It's good old client server.
Well, I look forward to an update from you guys when you get all these issues whipped.
When we get to the next level of issues.
Where do you guys don't post on like Astrobin, right? Mark, you use your blog or?
It's both. I usually have more sort of explanations and everything on my blog, but I usually have all my images on Astrobin. But that's how you can see. It's like we have the equipment up now for almost a year. We literally got one image out of it so far. We have a lot of partial data, but one image.
It's 2020. Or it was anyway. Well, thank you very much for oh, hi kids.
Hello.
Thank you very much for sharing all these adventures with us. We all appreciate it. And like I said, we look forward to an update. I'm sure you're going to whip all these problems. Hopefully we'll all get out under the stars together sometime soon. Things are loosening up in our region here. So Glenn, do you have anything to announce about workshops or anything like that? What have you heard from the Open Space Authority lately?
No, we're in that place where I keep pinging Terry and nothing comes back. So no updates yet, but I've been putting in way too many hours on how to stream from telescope computers, both for imaging workshops. I've got it nailed pretty well how we'll do it. And then I'm also working on little Raspberry Pis with cameras that could be dropped in at regular star parties for visual observers. and the point is to stream to the public smartphones without any prerequisites or internet requirements. So to make it more socially distancing, you're not sharing eyepieces, you're not touching multiple scopes and stuff. So that's an ongoing project that I'm working on, that'll help at some point. But yeah, and then I posted, I set up the club rig in the yard and redoing all the software and stuff. And it's been a year, so there's everything basically needed to be updated and stuff. So it was interesting to set up a new rig after a year and get my hands dirty remembering all of the little steps and stuff. So that's good for me anyway, but hopefully I'll be able to share that with people in the field soon.
Actually, one thing where you just say it, like, so I bought one of these, what was it, Unistellar EV scopes?
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever looked into it. I think they could be fantastic for public viewing.
Yep.
Because one thing I didn't realize it, you can actually, if people install the software on their phones, you can actually connect to the scope with many, many phones at the same time, and everybody can basically see the image on their own phone.
Yeah, that was actually the inspiration for this. So the club has just purchased one for the school Star Party program, and we will definitely also check it out for Star Parties. But frankly, the club has plenty of money. What we don't have is enough volunteers, right? We've got the same cast of characters that are both, in many cases, both board members and running a program, and they're already at their max capacity, right? And so what we really need is more club members to step up and volunteer to do something like that and run with it. It's like, and I don't mean to pick on you, Mark, but it's like,
I failed one spectacularly.
I'm going to show up at the Star Party. I'm going to operate this thing, and I'm going to train other people how to use it too. And that's kind of what we need.
Yeah, I actually, Glenn, that's a good point. I mean, Kanch, I think, dropped off. I used to run the Luna program, right? It's just sometimes life gets in the way of living, right?
Yeah.
So, but I would love to, I'd love to try and be a volunteer for one of these things again. I think Ed was doing this stuff, the binocular stargazing. Like some of these are really interesting to me, right?
Yeah.
And to Mark's point, I did actually participate in the school thing. I think I taught in one of the schools here for a couple of years. But I just couldn't sustain it. It's like time pressures and whatnot.
Yeah, so there needs to be, and again, I'm not directing this at anybody necessarily on this call. I'm just saying this is what I see the club, one way the club is lacking, right? So there needs to be a constant flow of new volunteers that come in and do stuff, and then maybe they move on, and that's fine. But right now that's what's limiting us to and we're we've done an amazing amount of stuff with the armchair Star Parties, and we have people from all over the country watching those and stuff. But we could do even more, if we had more human capital, so.
Yeah, it would be good. Right now I wouldn't know, even if I wanted to become a volunteer, this is just a suggestion, right? I wouldn't even know where you guys have gaps, to be honest.
Yeah.
There's just some easy way of figuring out if there are areas where I want, that's of interest to me as well, or maybe Mark and me together because we're running a remote observatory, whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. Having a list of things that you guys are looking to do but don't have the human capital to do would be good.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is. If it probably already exists. But
well, we need a vice president.
Good plug. Yeah. Man. I'll talk to you offline.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess, Bruce, that's pretty much what I had. Oh, I do have something else. And so I've been keeping this to myself very selfishly, and I just can't in good conscience do this anymore. But I am super happy with this autointegrate.js script that I didn't know about, and telescope.live included a plug for it in one of their newsletters. And I am just so much happier in PixInsight and going so much further in PixInsight now with this script. I just love it to death. It wants pre-calibrated files, which you could do with weighted batch preprocessing if you didn't have calibrated files already. But it just takes you all the way through to where you've got a TIFF file that's ready to go into Photoshop, and in one or two button presses. It's just amazing, and both for narrowband and for RGB.
Wow.
And LRGB. And it's just amazing. It really, I think if you look at you could probably look at my Astrobin and you could probably see, you know, the improvements, and even the things I went back and reprocessed would stand out. So I'm just really happy. And like I said, I can't keep it to myself anymore. So it's not in a repository. You have to get it from like a GitHub and install it. But you know, just Google autointegrate.js and you can download the zip file from the GitHub and put it in.
Is anybody else using Astro Pixel Processor?
I keep seeing people saying, you know, I couldn't deal with PixInsight, and so I'm trying something else. Yeah.
I've been using it. It's actually, I mean, it can't deal with chips like a 5100 with different gains and all that. But on easier chips, it's been working out pretty well. I mean, it's yeah, it's smart enough to auto-assign masters to channels and do integration by channel and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Local normalization, it does all of those things, right? Like everything you'd expect. Seems to work pretty well. I mean, it's just multi-threaded and stuff like that. I'll check out this auto integrate as well. But so far, I've been using Astro Pixel Processor.
Yeah.
It's not free, but it's not too expensive either.
Well, and it took me a long time to get even started in PixInsight, and I pretty much just been using, you know, weighted batch preprocessing and the easy whatever suite, whatever that's called, the easy processing suite. So I haven't really got into the individual processes like you're supposed to, but that's where this script just, you know, you don't have to. It's just you press the button and it goes through the whole thing for you. So I've been really happy with it.
Definitely have to check that out.
Yeah. Well, and you've got some data now too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anybody have any questions or images that you guys have come up with in the past month or so that you wanted to share? No takers? Okay. Well, I'm actually going to be away in the middle of next month. So I would say I'll see you, but I don't know if I'll have a connection where I'm going. So we'll see. I'm sure somebody's going to grab the reins and host the next meeting. And we're working on something interesting. So have fun at the next meeting. I hope to see you there. All right. So I guess this will conclude our Imaging SIG meeting for the month. Thanks for coming, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Sharing again, guys.
Yeah. See you guys again.
Everybody.
All right.
Bye all.
Thanks.
Take care.